The Citadel had always been described as the beating heart of galactic civilization, a place where light seemed to breathe on its own, where the walls glowed with the memory of countless species who had chosen unity over ruin. Yet on this night, the Citadel was neither radiant nor eternal. It was burning. It was buckling. It was becoming something no one in the galaxy had believed possible. The Reapers had come, and they had come in numbers no strategist had ever prepared for. Their black hulls filled the sky like a moving eclipse, and every corridor of the once glorious station trembled beneath the sound of their descent. Fleets that had defended peace for millennia were nothing more than scattered debris drifting past shattered towers. Alliance ships fought bravely, but bravery had begun to feel like a language the universe no longer spoke. Inside the station, civilians ran through streets they had walked 1,000 times, now unrecognizable. Mothers carried children through smoke that tasted like burned metal. Turian officers shouted orders that no one could hear. Solarian medics worked with hands that shook. Asari commandos fired into the darkness, even when the darkness fired back with far more precision. Every level of the Citadel had become a graveyard in the making, and every heart inside it had begun to accept a truth no one wished to speak aloud. The station might fall, the galaxy might follow. In the highest chamber, the council stood silent. Their faces bore the exhaustion of leaders who had run out of speeches. Reports arrived faster than they could be answered. Evacuation routes had collapsed. Defense grids had gone dark. Reaper capital ships were tightening a ring around the station like predators savoring the end of a long hunt. There was no plan left. There was only the waiting. Then the sky broke. It did not break the way a storm breaks. It did not break the way a ship crashes. It broke the way something ancient breaks when the universe itself remembers it exists. A rupture of violent energy opened above the Citadel, a wound of light so intense that even the Reapers paused to observe it. The colors within it were unfamiliar, shifting between crimson and green, between fury and grief. And through that impossible tier, something began to fall, something enormous. It struck the Citadel with a force that rewrote the battlefield in a single instant. A tower crumbled. A Reaper ground unit disintegrated. The impact carved a crater into the ancient metal of the station, and shockwaves rolled outward like the pulse of a wounded god. Alliance soldiers were thrown from their feet. Civilians froze mid-step. Even the Reapers, who feared nothing, hesitated. They believed at first that another weapon had arrived, perhaps a rival machine, perhaps a fragment of some forgotten cycle come back to claim its place. Then the dust began to settle, and the galaxy saw him. He rose from the crater slowly, as if gravity itself was uncertain how to respond to him. His shoulders were mountains of muscle. His arms were the size of gunships. His skin was green, but not the calm green of forests or oceans. It was the green of storms that had never learned mercy. His eyes glowed with a fury so pure that no scanner, no algorithm, no database could name it. This was not simply a creature. This was a warning that had grown legs. This was rage that had been given a body. This was Worldbreaker Hulk. The Reapers reacted the only way they knew how. They attacked. Ground units surged forward, weapons charged, targeting systems locked. Their advance was flawless, coordinated, merciless. It had ended civilizations. It had erased empires. It should have ended him in seconds. It did not. Hulk barely turned his head. A single strike of his fist met a Reaper unit the size of a building, and the machine folded like paper in a hurricane. Its body flew through 3 towers before finally coming to rest in a heap of twisted metal. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like the galaxy had forgotten how to breathe. Alliance soldiers stopped firing. Some lowered their weapons. Some simply stared. In the middle of a war that had stripped them of every belief they once held, they now witnessed something no doctrine had prepared them for. A being who did not fight the Reapers. A being who dismissed them. Inside the Reaper network, calculations began to move at impossible speeds. He was biological. That much was certain. But he was not indoctrinated. His mind was closed to their whispers. He carried no reactor, no fusion core, no dark energy signature. He had no armor, no external weapon, no shielding. Yet his physical output kept climbing. Every scan produced numbers that contradicted the last. Every projection failed. For the first time in an unmeasurable span of cycles, the Reapers looked at something and could not name what they were looking at. Their first intelligence reached a conclusion. Hulk was another hostile organism, nothing more. It ordered a full engagement. It saw no reason to reconsider. Reapers did not reconsider. They were the ones who forced others to. Then Hulk turned, slowly. Not toward the Reapers, but toward the burning heart of the Citadel. He saw the flames climbing along civilian districts. He saw a mother clutching a child against a shattered wall. He saw a young soldier bleeding on the ground while trying to reload a weapon that no longer worked. He saw the panic. He saw the fear. He saw the pain. And something inside him broke. It was not a scream. It was not a roar. It was a shift, deep and elemental, as though the universe itself had drawn in a breath. His muscles tightened. His shoulders rose. His fists closed. The green of his skin deepened into something darker, older, more absolute. The ground beneath him began to crack, not from his weight but from the sheer pressure of what he was becoming. The Reapers had spent a lifetime studying fear. They had built their entire cycle upon the certainty that fear was a weapon they alone could wield. But now, in that single moment, they had given the angriest creature in existence a reason to become angrier still. And though their intelligences did not yet understand it, the balance of the war had already tilted. Something had entered the Citadel that could not be measured. Something had arrived that would not be forgotten. Something had come to fight. The moments after Hulk's first strike lingered in the air like a held breath the galaxy did not know how to release. The battlefield had not gone quiet, for battle rarely allows silence, but a strange stillness settled into the Citadel's ruined districts. Alliance officers stared at their consoles, unsure whether to trust the data streaming across them. Scanner readings jumped and reset. Targeting systems refused to categorize what they were seeing. Field commanders whispered into their radios, asking for orders that had not been written in any manual. The Citadel had become a place where the impossible had begun to feel routine, but even here, Hulk stood outside every category the defenders knew. The first officer to speak into the command channel did so with a voice that trembled between disbelief and dread. He asked for permission to observe rather than engage. He said the newcomer did not appear to require assistance. He said the Reapers were bleeding. That single word, bleeding, spread through the command network faster than any encrypted order. Bleeding. The Reapers were bleeding. And the being responsible had barely moved from the crater he had made. The Citadel's remaining leadership scrambled to understand him. Military scientists patched into every available scanner. They searched for a power source, a fusion cell, a hidden implant, a genetic marker of augmentation. They found nothing. His body defied every framework they had ever built. He appeared to have no armor. He appeared to have no advanced weaponry. He appeared to have no shielding. Yet conventional weapons barely slowed him. Even stray Reaper artillery, powerful enough to punch through cruiser plating, glanced off him like rain against a mountain. Some commanders began to fear him almost as deeply as they feared the Reapers. They had spent their entire careers preparing for enemies whose limits could be measured, whose weaknesses could be found, whose behavior could be predicted. Hulk offered none of that. He was an unknown standing at the center of their broken sky, and unknowns rarely favored those who had already lost everything else. Yet fear could not survive long in a place where death was already so close. Slowly, reluctantly, the Alliance chose to trust the direction of his rage, even if they could not trust the depth of it. A perimeter formed around him, not a cage, not a defense. Simply a boundary drawn by soldiers who did not want to interfere with something they did not understand. Civilians watched from broken windows. Wounded soldiers turned their heads toward him as if searching for an answer they had never been promised. And beyond them, deep in the smoke of the outer districts, the Reapers began to change their approach. They came in waves at first. Smaller units, faster and more mobile, designed to test his reactions. Hulk answered them without ceremony. He caught one mid-flight and drove it into the ground so hard that its wreckage sank through several floors of the station. He tore another apart with his hands as though it were made of soft clay. Their weapons scorched him. Their blades cut nothing. Their coordinated tactics dissolved the instant they touched him. Then came the larger units. Destroyers built for planetary suppression, machines that had ended cities on distant worlds. They came with heavier weapons, denser armor, more advanced targeting. They did not fare better. Each destruction sent Hulk deeper into his fury. Each explosion pressed him further into the state the Reapers were beginning to fear. His footsteps grew heavier. His breathing grew slower. His muscles flexed with a rhythm that felt closer to tectonic movement than to biology. The Reapers then deployed heavily armed ground platforms, great walking fortresses that had never known defeat. Alliance officers braced themselves for what they believed would be a devastating clash. They were half correct. It was devastating, but not for Hulk. He tore through the first platform's plating like it was fabric. He gripped the second by one of its immense legs and swung its body into a Reaper battalion. The impact ended nearly every unit in the surrounding sector. It was not a battle. It was a demonstration. For the Alliance, the meaning was becoming clear. Hulk was not simply strong. He was escalating. Every encounter made him worse for his enemies and stranger to his allies. Some soldiers began cheering. Others watched in stunned silence. A few whispered prayers to gods their ancestors had left behind. The battlefield had begun to move around him as though he were its center of gravity, and no one on either side had planned for that reality. The Reapers, however, were not without patience. They were creatures of cold intelligence, and cold intelligence rarely admits defeat until every option has been explored. They stopped throwing units into him directly. Instead, they began to reshape the battlefield around him. They collapsed towers. They shattered walkways. They ignited civilian districts he had already tried to protect. They chose targets carefully, ensuring their destruction would occur within his line of sight. Their goal was not to kill him. Their goal was to break him, to provoke him, to force him into a rage so uncontrolled that he would destroy the very things he had come to save. The strategy worked, but not the way they had intended. Every civilian who fell within his view seemed to add weight to something inside him. Every scream of a child, every burst of flame across a home, every soldier collapsing beneath a Reaper blast. His transformation shifted with each loss. His shoulders grew broader. His arms grew thicker. The veins across his body pulsed with the pressure of something that no living creature was meant to hold. Buildings shook when he walked. Shockwaves rolled from his strikes. The ground developed cracks that spread from every impact of his feet. The Alliance began to understand that they were witnessing something completely outside the language of war. Hulk was not defeating the Reapers because he possessed superior equipment. He was defeating them because their own cruelty was feeding him. The more they tried to break the Citadel, the harder it became to break him. In a war built entirely on machine logic, they had accidentally created the perfect anti-weapon, a being whose strength grew in direct proportion to their brutality. The section of the battlefield he stood on had changed. It was no longer defined by Reaper dominance. It was defined by him. Alliance soldiers began to reposition themselves according to his movement. Civilian evacuations were redirected through corridors he had already cleared. His presence began to give the Citadel something it had not felt in weeks. A center, a pussy, a reason to keep fighting. Then came the sound, deep, rhythmic, mechanical, the unmistakable thunder of a Reaper capital unit approaching. Its shadow reached across the ruined skyline as though the night itself had grown taller. Alliance soldiers braced. Civilians froze. Hulk turned toward it slowly, his glowing eyes reflecting its enormous silhouette. For the first time since the invasion began, the capital unit paused. Just for a heartbeat, just long enough for the galaxy to realize that even the Reapers were beginning to hesitate. The pause did not last long, but it was long enough to be remembered. In the archives that would one day be written about this night, historians would mark that moment as the instant when the Reaper campaign ceased to feel inevitable. A capital unit had hesitated. A machine bred from cycles of extinction had, for a fraction of a second, considered the being in front of it before making its move. That hesitation was small. That hesitation was subtle. But in a war shaped by absolute certainty, even a flicker of doubt was a wound. The capital unit responded the only way its programming allowed. It called for reinforcements on a scale that the Citadel had not yet seen. From the outer districts, from the ruined skies, from the shattered docks along the station's edge, thousands of Reaper units began to converge. Ground platforms, airborne skimmers, armored siege forms, assault constructs that had once suppressed entire moons. They came from every direction at once, guided by a coordinated intelligence that treated the battle as a mathematical puzzle rather than a war. Alliance soldiers watched from their defensive positions with a mixture of awe and terror. They had seen large Reaper deployments before. They had never seen one aimed at a single target. The sky above Hulk grew dark with movement. Structures groaned as troop transports docked along the ruined skyline. Rows upon rows of walking machines advanced across broken avenues. It looked less like a battle and more like the sky itself preparing to fall a second time. Hulk did not wait for them to arrive. He charged. His first step sent tremors across an entire district. His second cracked the ground beneath a defensive line. By his third step, the ground was no longer beneath him at all. He had leaped, a bound so powerful that it carried him hundreds of meters into the middle of the enemy formation. When he landed, an entire section of Reaper armor was crushed beneath the impact. Debris scattered outward. Alliance soldiers dropped low. Civilians in distant shelters felt the shockwave rumble through the stone. The battle that followed did not resemble any conventional warfare the galaxy had ever seen. Hulk tore through armored units with his bare hands. He gripped one Reaper walker by its front leg and swung it into another, using its body as a hammer that shattered anything it touched. He grabbed a smaller unit by its head and drove it downward into the metal ground so deeply that its wreckage disappeared beneath the floor of the station. A destroyer aimed a concentrated beam at him. He walked into it. The beam scorched his skin. His skin held. He walked closer. The destroyer fired again. He ripped its main weapon from its body and used the weapon itself to tear open its core. Every impact sent debris rocketing across the Citadel. Buildings collapsed nearby. Walkways buckled. Alliance snipers stopped firing simply because they could not target anything without accidentally targeting him. He had become the battlefield. Every meter of ground moved with his rhythm. A larger Reaper destroyer arrived above him, its cannons focused with the precision of a species that had never missed. It unleashed a burst of firepower that would have leveled a city. Hulk survived. The energy washed over him. His skin blackened, then healed. The attack meant to erase him only drove him further into his fury. He roared, and the sound rolled across the Citadel in a wave that shattered glass in distant districts. Then he leaped again. The destroyer tried to move. It was too late. Hulk landed on its armored back and drove his fists into its central plating. Sparks and molten metal poured outward. He pried the plating apart with both hands and reached inside. The destroyer convulsed. Its cannons misfired. Its shielding collapsed. And then, with a single motion that would be replayed on Alliance briefings for years, Hulk tore the destroyer's core out through its own armor. The unit did not fall gracefully. It fell like a dying beast, its immense body slamming across a quarter of the district. Structures were flattened. Reaper units nearby were crushed by their own comrade. Alliance forces watched in silence. Even the Reapers, who fought with mechanical calm, paused for another critical instant. The impossible had happened. A Reaper had been destroyed. Not through orbital coordination, not through fleet actions, not through an army of soldiers with advanced weaponry. A single biological being, wielding nothing but rage and fists, had ended one of the most feared war machines in existence. Word spread through the Citadel faster than any signal. Comm channels erupted with disbelief. Officers repeated the message 3 times, then 4, then 5, as if saying it aloud would confirm what they had witnessed. Civilians in shelters heard the news through hushed voices. Soldiers who had already accepted death felt something they had not felt in weeks. A tremor of hope, a fragile spark that no one dared name too loudly. Commander Shepard stood at the heart of the Alliance command structure, watching the footage arrive from every angle. Their expression was unreadable. Their staff argued behind them in overlapping voices. Some officers wanted to evacuate Hulk from the Citadel. They feared his power would eventually turn against them by accident. Others insisted that he should be directed toward Reaper strongholds across the galaxy, weaponized like a walking fleet. Others still whispered that he was a myth given flesh, a sign that the galaxy had not been abandoned. Shepard listened to all of them. Then Shepard shook their head, because Shepard had seen what the others had missed. Hulk was not a weapon. He was not a resource. He was not a technology. He had his own compass. He had his own moral instinct. He did not care about the Council. He did not care about treaties. He did not care about who ruled which system or which fleet claimed which star. He cared about people being hurt. That was all. That was everything. And that made him something no strategist had ever known how to categorize. He was dangerous, yes, but not in the way a rogue soldier or a rebel faction is dangerous. He was dangerous the way a storm is dangerous. He could not be controlled, but he could be trusted, because storms did not choose sides. They simply moved through the world according to their nature. And this storm, for reasons no one could fully explain, had chosen to move against the Reapers. Deep within the Reaper network, that idea was beginning to form as well. Their analysis of the destroyed unit revealed something unsettling. Hulk's power output during the battle had not been static. It had risen, not by a small percentage, not by a predictable margin. It had risen far beyond the level he had shown during his arrival. The projections concluded that if the pattern continued, his upper limit could not be estimated with any reliable model. Every attempt to extrapolate produced errors. Every attempt to graph the curve failed to close. The Reapers had spent uncounted cycles building certainty. Now, for the first time, their certainty had begun to slip. And in the deep silence of their networked mind, a new signal appeared, faint at first, but growing steadily louder. Concern. Real concern. The Reapers changed, not visibly. Not in the way an army changes when a general falls or a fleet changes when a flagship is lost. They changed in a manner far more subtle and far more dangerous. They had encountered something they could not classify. And when creatures of pure calculation cannot classify a thing, they do not retreat. They study, they dissect. They dismantle their own assumptions and rebuild them around the anomaly. They stopped treating Hulk as a simple biological threat. That approach had already produced too many losses. Instead, they began collecting data on him with an obsession that bordered on reverence. Every strike he threw was analyzed. Every second of his roars was recorded. Every crack he left in the Citadel's floor was measured, cross-referenced, and stored in their networks alongside centuries of harvested knowledge from civilizations long extinct. They wanted to understand him not as a creature, but as a phenomenon. Their initial findings were disturbing. His cellular regeneration operated on a scale that no known biological system could sustain. Damaged tissue rebuilt itself faster than energy laws should permit. His muscle density kept increasing during battle, not simply from adrenaline but from something deeper, something almost quantum in nature. His neural activity did not follow any pattern the Reapers had cataloged in over 200 million years of harvesting. His emotional responses spiked in ways that changed his physical strength, and no biological framework in their archives explained that link. They ran his data through every model they had. Every model failed. His strength appeared to have no clearly measurable upper limit. That single conclusion, produced by trillions of computations across the Reaper Collective, was enough to send a low pulse of confusion rippling through their coordinated intelligence. In the language of machines, it was equivalent to a shiver. Yet the Reapers were not without ambition. If they could not defeat him through force, they would attempt something they had refined across countless civilizations. Psychological warfare. It had toppled kings. It had shattered heroes. It had turned the strongest soldiers in the galaxy into weeping cowards. It would surely work on him. They began by projecting memories into his mind. Fragments they had scavenged during the fight, stitched together from stolen thoughts and residual neural traces. They showed him fire. They showed him the sound of his own laboratory long ago. They showed him a man in a lab coat trembling as he looked at the mirror. Bruce Banner. That name meant something. They latched onto it. They pulled at it. They shaped their attack around it. They tampered with the communications of nearby Alliance soldiers, feeding false messages into channels Hulk might overhear. They created holographic simulations of Banner's past, moments of loss, moments of failure, moments of rage he had spent decades trying to forgive. They painted the ruined battlefield with images of people Banner had failed to save, people he had accidentally hurt, people he had loved and lost and buried beneath the weight of his own strength. Hulk saw all of it. For a moment he swayed. His breathing shifted, his fists loosened. Somewhere inside him, Banner stirred. The Reapers detected the change and pushed harder. They saw the emotional signature they had been searching for: trauma, loss. A protective instinct so deep it had once been mistaken for a curse. They believed they had found their opening. They constructed a false battlefield around him. Careful illusions replaced the ruins of the Citadel with the horror they thought would break him. Bodies of civilians, children beyond saving. Alliance soldiers he had fought beside, torn apart in front of his eyes. Everything he had come to protect, presented as already lost. The Reapers were confident that this would either paralyze him or turn his rage inward, causing him to collapse under its own weight. Instead, something else happened. Hulk did not collapse. He did not weep. He did not stop. The illusion did not weaken him. It ignited him. The false images filled him not with despair, but with an anger so deep that it seemed to bend the space around his body. His shoulders swelled. His arms grew heavier. Green light pulsed beneath his skin as though something ancient inside him had begun to burn. He roared, and the illusion shattered like glass under a storm. The false battlefield melted away, revealing the real Citadel again, but Hulk did not calm. The transformation had already begun. Worldbreaker Hulk emerged. The Citadel physically shook. The station's stabilizers strained against a force they had never been calibrated to resist. Ships in nearby docks lost their orientation. Glass shattered across entire districts. Alarms wailed at frequencies no engineer remembered installing. Emergency crews reported gravitational fluctuations that made no physical sense. It was as though his fury had become a new kind of force acting upon the world. Reaper forces near him began to retreat, not in disorder, not in fear, in something worse, in tactical humility. They did not simply run. They deliberately increased the distance between themselves and him, adjusting their formations in a way that suggested they no longer considered his environment safe to occupy. That behavior alone was unprecedented. Reapers did not withdraw. Reapers advanced. That they were now redistributing themselves around him revealed a change in their internal calculations. For the first time in their existence, the Reapers encountered a combatant whose maximum output could not be modeled. Every projection produced infinities. Every simulation crashed. Every algorithm that had guided their extinction cycles across billions of years produced results that could not be trusted. Something in the fabric of their logic began to fray at the edges. Their central intelligence began classifying Hulk in a new category. Not a hostile organism, not a rogue variable, not an anomaly, something more dangerous. A potential existential threat. The kind of designation they had reserved only for cataclysmic phenomena that stood outside the natural order of civilizations. Yet even in this new classification, the Reapers made a critical mistake. It was not a mistake of computation. It was a mistake of philosophy. They still believed that everything could be understood through calculation. They still believed that with enough data, enough simulations, enough recursion, they could reduce him to a number. They could not conceive of a being whose essence lay outside the boundaries of measurable phenomena. They could not accept that some part of him existed in a place their formulas had never been designed to touch. That belief would become their undoing, because Hulk was no longer simply a creature reacting to their attacks. He had become something they had accidentally awakened, something whose depth their instruments could not reach. Something who had begun to understand them faster than they were beginning to understand him. The Reapers had spent uncountable millennia certain that they were the greatest force in the galaxy. And now, in the ruins of the Citadel, that certainty had begun to develop cracks. Small ones, almost invisible, but cracks nonetheless. And once a crack forms in a mind built on absolute certainty, the entire structure begins to remember that it, too, is finite. The next assault came without warning, though warnings had long since stopped mattering. The Reapers no longer needed the element of surprise. They needed volume. Overwhelming, crushing, uncountable volume. The kind of assault that had ended civilizations before language existed. Their fleets tightened around the Citadel like fingers closing over a dying flame. Their ground forces intensified. Their orbital weapons synchronized. The station's outer defenses, already battered beyond recognition, began to buckle under a wave of destruction that seemed to grow larger with every passing minute. Docks collapsed inward. Perimeter towers fell in slow, groaning silence. Entire skylines disappeared behind curtains of Reaper fire. Alliance ships that had defended the outer rings for days finally began to fall, their hulls torn apart by weapons designed for planetary annihilation. The evacuation corridors thinned. Fleeing shuttles were swallowed by explosions before they could reach open space. Alliance officers screamed orders into channels that no longer answered. Turian squads formed final defensive lines with weapons that no longer worked. Solarian medics stopped triaging patients because there was no longer anywhere safe to move them. Even Asari commandos, the finest warriors of their kind, began preparing themselves for the deaths they had spent their long lives postponing. Hulk saw all of it. He saw the fires reaching higher than they had before. He saw the wounded gathered in shelters that were no longer safe. He saw the youngest children pressing themselves against the walls, whispering words in languages he did not know but understood anyway. He saw hope in its final form, small, fragile, refusing to die even in the face of certainty, and he saw the Reapers pressing against it, ready to crush it into silence. Something inside him shifted, not the way a storm gathers, not the way a soldier prepares. It shifted the way tectonic plates shift when the world itself decides to change. Deep beneath his skin, a rhythm began to build that did not belong to biology. His muscles thickened again, but the growth was different this time. It did not feel like anger being added to his body. It felt like something being remembered, something that had always been there but had never been fully allowed to breathe. His footsteps grew heavier. His breathing slowed until each inhale rolled across the battlefield like distant thunder. His skin darkened, his eyes brightened. His shoulders rose to a height that made the soldiers around him back away without meaning to. The Worldbreaker had begun to fully emerge. His body did not simply expand. It reshaped itself around a force too enormous for its previous form. The ground fractured with every movement. The air around him distorted, bending light as though heat were rising from a furnace. Small metal fragments trembled and slid toward him, as though gravity itself had begun to reorient around his presence. Alliance officers watching from far away stopped speaking mid-sentence. Reaper analysts, monitoring him from orbit, saw their instruments overflow with data they had no framework to interpret. Then Hulk moved. He did not walk. He did not run. He leaped, and the leap carried him hundreds of meters across the ruined skyline. He landed on a Reaper walker with such force that its armored legs collapsed instantly, its central mass folding into itself. He rose, dragging another walker beside him, and used it as a bludgeon against a third. 3 Reaper machines destroyed in a single motion. The soldiers who watched from below did not cheer. They did not shout. They simply stared, as though the moment had reached beyond the vocabulary of survival. The battle became mythological. Hulk tore through Reaper platoons designed to suppress planetary armies. He shattered armor forged from materials harvested across 1,000 extinct civilizations. He grabbed a Reaper missile in mid-flight, redirected it into another unit, and disappeared into the resulting explosion, only to emerge on the other side untouched. He grabbed a destroyer's leg with both hands, dragged the machine to the ground, and drove it into the metal floor until its central lights went dark. Where he moved, the battlefield rearranged itself around his rhythm. Where he struck, entire Reaper formations lost their coherence. At one point he simply struck the ground. Not a target, not a machine, the ground itself. The shockwave that followed rolled outward in a perfect ring. Reaper units in every direction lost their footing. Some collapsed entirely. Others were thrown into distant structures, their bodies breaking apart mid-air. The ring reached the edge of a Reaper formation stationed at the horizon, and the entire formation folded in half as though a giant hand had swept across it. Alliance soldiers gasped, some laughed, some cried, some did both. But even amid this spectacle, a new fear began to form. Not fear of the Reapers, fear of Hulk. Shepard saw it first. They studied the readings pouring in from every sensor they still had access to. The station was cracking under his footsteps. Districts he had already saved were now trembling from his shockwaves. He was no longer merely defeating the Reapers. He was reshaping the environment around him. If his power continued climbing at this rate, the Citadel itself might not survive its own protector. The very structure that had housed civilization for millennia might collapse under the emotional weight of the being trying to save it. Shepard whispered into a private channel. Their voice was steady but low. They said something no commander wanted to say aloud. They said that Hulk's greatest danger might no longer be defeat. It might be victory. If he lost complete control at this scale, no one would be able to reach him. No one would be able to guide him. No one would be able to stop him. And then, no matter how many Reapers he defeated, everyone around him might still die. The question changed. The Alliance had spent hours trying to figure out how to help Hulk grow stronger. Now they needed to figure out how to prevent his strength from destroying everyone he was fighting for. That question would not be answered quickly, and it might not be answered at all. Meanwhile, deep within the Reaper network, another response began to form. A new voice. Not a soldier, not a machine. A collective intelligence far older than any harvested civilization. It reached out through subtle frequencies designed to bypass conventional communication. It spoke directly into Hulk's mind. It did not shout. It did not threaten. It offered peace. No more war. No more suffering. No more people dying. All Hulk needed to do was stop fighting. The voice was gentle. The offer was crafted from countless cycles of persuasion. It had bent kings. It had softened warriors. It had brought entire species to their knees. The Reapers understood that resistance often broke when survival was promised, and they were offering him survival at a level no other creature had ever received. Not just his own survival. The survival of everyone he had come to protect. Hulk paused, only for a moment. His shoulders shifted. His breathing steadied. His glowing eyes turned inward, as though considering the offer at a level even he did not fully understand. Then his answer came. He attacked. The Reaper voice fell silent. Its offer was withdrawn, and in the depths of their collective mind, for the first time in their existence, the Reapers understood that they had encountered something that could not be bought, could not be broken, and could not be bargained with. The Reapers had encountered resistance many times across the endless span of their cycles, but resistance was a language they understood. They knew how to unmake it. They knew how to smother it under overwhelming numbers, how to poison it with despair, how to fracture it from within by turning heroes against their own people. Every previous civilization had eventually cracked under one of these methods. The formula had never failed, until now. The formula was failing now, openly, loudly, catastrophically. Their entire philosophy rested on a foundation of technological superiority so absolute that no organic creature could hope to challenge it. Their weapons were engineered from the corpses of extinct civilizations. Their bodies were designed to withstand cosmic phenomena. Their intelligences were shaped by 100 million years of ruthless refinement. In their eyes, biology had always been a temporary state, a soft prelude to inevitable collapse. They had never met a biological creature they could not reduce to numbers. They had never met a mind they could not eventually reshape. They had never met a fear they could not amplify into surrender. Then Hulk had entered the battlefield. He could not be intimidated. Intimidation required an imagination that could conceive of defeat. Hulk did not seem to possess that imagination. He looked at their fleets the way a wave looked at driftwood. He could not be indoctrinated. Their whispers, the same ones that had unwound entire species from within, slid off him as though he lived in a place their voices could not reach. He could not be reasoned with. Their offers of peace, so precisely tuned, so ancient, so exhaustively refined, had been answered not with words but with a punch that had shattered an entire district. And most of all, his power increased when resistance became more desperate. That was the detail that unsettled them most. Every strategy the Reapers had ever built assumed that intense pressure would eventually break their enemy. Now they were witnessing an enemy who transformed intense pressure into fuel. The more they struck him, the harder he struck them. The more they threatened his allies, the more terrifying he became. The more they revealed of their strategies, the more of himself he unlocked. He was not simply resisting them. He was consuming their attacks and turning them into new depths of power. So they escalated. They deployed larger units. Larger than any they had ever committed to a single ground battle. Hulk destroyed them. They sent multiple capital-class forces, machines that had once toppled empires in single afternoons. Hulk attacked them directly, throwing pieces of their own kin into their formations. They ordered orbital bombardment. Beams of destruction rained down across the Citadel, tearing through metal, stone, and sky. Hulk stood at the center of it and endured. The bombardment washed over him like weather. When it stopped, he was still standing, and still angry. The Citadel had become the center of a battle that would be studied by every surviving civilization for as long as memory endured. Alliance fleets took new positions around Hulk, not to protect him, to follow him. Turian squadrons realigned their strike patterns based on his movements. Asari commandos coordinated their biotic attacks with his rhythm. Solarian units altered their infiltration missions to strike Reaper positions weakened by his presence. Human forces began building tactical models with his location marked at the center. Krogan fighters, once feared for their reckless ferocity, laughed openly as they charged beside him. Volus, Elker, Quarian, Batarian, even factions that had never trusted one another, began coordinating around a single point of gravity. Hulk had become the spearhead of the galaxy's defense. Yet even now, even with everything falling apart, the Reapers did not surrender. They did what they had done for hundreds of millions of years. They analyzed, they adapted, and finally, deep within their collective mind, they identified something they believed might be a vulnerability: Bruce Banner. They realized that Hulk's physical strength was enormous, perhaps beyond measurable, but his emotional core remained connected to Banner. Banner had spent decades struggling with the being inside him. Banner had feared him. Banner had hated him. Banner had begged him not to emerge. That relationship, that endless conflict, was the seam the Reapers could pry apart. If they could sever Hulk from Banner or turn Banner against Hulk, they believed the entire construct could collapse. They designed a psychological attack unlike any they had used before. A precise, layered, deeply personal assault. They reached into every memory Banner had of loss and pain. They pulled every scene where Banner had feared himself, every moment where he had wept for people he had accidentally hurt, every night when he had begged the universe to let him die quietly so no one else would ever suffer because of him. The Reapers wove all of it into a single sustained attack. Banner felt it first. He heard old voices calling him. He saw shapes from years he had tried to forget. He felt the shame he had spent lifetimes running from. His breath quickened, his hands shook. His heart beat with the panicked rhythm of a boy who had once been afraid of every mirror. Hulk felt the disturbance ripple through him. His transformation began to falter. The Reapers pushed harder. They forced Banner to confront the moment he had first become Hulk. They forced him to relive the fear, the isolation, the certainty that he would never again be the man he had once been. They forced him to hear echoes of loved ones who had died. They forced him to remember every time he had hidden from himself. For a moment, Hulk lost focus. His posture shifted. His hands trembled. The green light of his body flickered. Alliance officers watching from afar gasped. Reaper analysts felt the closest thing they had ever known to satisfaction. They believed the weakness had been found. They believed the being before them was about to break. Instead, something else happened, something the Reapers had never anticipated. Banner did not collapse. Hulk did not shrink. They met. Not on the battlefield, but somewhere deeper. Somewhere that existed only inside the strange shared space between them. For the first time in decades, Banner did not flinch when he saw Hulk. He did not run. He did not weep. He looked at Hulk fully, and Hulk did the same. They spoke without words. They understood without argument. Banner accepted the being who had lived inside him. Hulk recognized the man whose pain had shaped him. They realized what the Reapers had missed. The rage was not a weakness. The rage was a wound, and the wound had a soul. Banner stopped fighting Hulk. Hulk stopped fighting Banner. The two identities did not merge into one. They aligned. They synchronized. They became a single act of protection, driven by both compassion and fury, guided by both intellect and instinct. Worldbreaker Hulk did not lose power. He gained focus. His shoulders straightened. His posture stabilized. The tremors around his feet steadied into a rhythm that no longer cracked the environment. The transformation refined itself. The Reapers had removed the one thing that had limited him. They had believed Banner was his weakness. They had not understood that Banner had also been the boundary that held Hulk in check. Now that boundary was gone, and what remained was something more dangerous than either the man or the monster. A being complete, a being aligned, a being at peace with his own storm. Deep within the Reaper network, the pulses of confusion shifted into something new. Not concern, not confusion. Something they had never registered before at this magnitude. Panic, real panic. And once panic entered a mind built to control everything, that mind had already begun to lose the war. The Reapers had reached their final line of thinking. They had exhausted intimidation. They had exhausted psychological warfare. They had exhausted numerical superiority. Their calculations, once so pristine, had begun to break down in patterns their intelligences could not repair. So they did what all things built on absolute logic do when logic begins to fracture. They resolved to end the equation entirely. They would not simply conquer the Citadel anymore. They would not seize it. They would not process it. They would destroy it completely, with everything and everyone inside it. If they could not add this station to the endless list of harvested worlds, they would remove it from the timeline entirely. It was not desperation. Reapers did not feel desperation. It was correction. In their view, an equation that could not resolve had to be erased before it corrupted the rest of their cycle. The final assault began with a sound that no living creature had ever expected to hear. Every Reaper capital ship in the sector powered up its long-dormant central weapon simultaneously. The stars around the Citadel dimmed. The gravitational field of the station shifted. The atmosphere along the outer rings crackled with static as ancient machines drew energy from a reservoir the galaxy had never known existed. Reaper fleets formed a perfect sphere around the station, an unbroken shell of dark metal and cold light. Every angle was covered. Every corridor of escape was cut. The Citadel, once the crown of civilization, had become the center of a slowly closing tomb. Alliance ships fought with everything they had. Cruisers that had been damaged for hours pushed their reactors past every safety threshold. Fighters flew close enough to enemy hulls that their pilots could see individual weapons cycling. Frigates darted between destroyers, dragging Reaper fire away from evacuation lanes. Turian dreadnoughts turned in slow, majestic arcs, their cannons ripping wounds into the enemy's outer ring. Asari command vessels wove intricate biotic barriers across battered escape corridors. Krogan warships crashed directly into Reaper formations, their crews howling battle cries older than treaties. Solarian frigates unleashed weapons that had been experimental only weeks earlier, hoping the impossible might yield some new advantage. Alliance fleets refused to fall. Ground forces did the same. Every district in the Citadel became a defensive stand. Civilians who had never held a weapon in their lives picked up rifles from fallen soldiers. Doctors carried wounded to inner sanctuaries. Engineers repurposed damaged shuttles into makeshift barricades. Even children helped, running messages between shelters when communications collapsed. The station had learned something. It had learned that surrender no longer felt possible, and it had learned that hope had a face, and the face was green. At the center of everything stood Worldbreaker Hulk. His silhouette rose above the ruins like a mountain that had grown limbs. His breathing was slow now, measured, deliberate. He did not roar. He did not thrash. He moved with the precision of a storm that had finally learned how to think. Every step he took carried weight the Citadel had never been designed to absorb. Every glance from his glowing eyes seemed to bend the light of the battlefield around him. He no longer fought like a creature. He fought like an idea. and ideas were harder to kill than machines. The battle unfolded across multiple levels at once. Above the Citadel, Alliance fleets clashed with Reaper capital ships, their engagements lighting the sky with continuous fire. Below, in the ruined districts, Alliance ground forces held their positions with a determination that the Reapers had rarely encountered. And in between, moving faster than his size should allow, Hulk carved a path through Reaper armies as though he were parting a river. Shepard coordinated everything from a shattered command center. Communications were breaking constantly, forcing them to route messages through unstable relays. Shepard did not panic. Shepard did not doubt. Shepard understood that this was the last stand of a civilization, and last stands did not require polish. They required faith. Shepard's faith did not lie in any specific outcome. It lay in the people around them. It lay in the fleets refusing to break. It lay in the ground forces still holding lines they had no reason to hold. And it lay in the strange green giant who had become the beating heart of an entire galaxy's survival. Meanwhile, deep within the Reaper collective, the intelligence that guided the invasion began asking a question its own architecture had not designed it to ask. Why? Why did this creature refuse to yield? Why did his allies refuse to abandon him? Why did entire species suddenly find courage they had not shown for centuries? Why did the resistance grow stronger in direct proportion to the force applied? The Reapers finally arrived at a conclusion that startled them. Hulk was not fighting because he believed he could win. He was not fighting because he expected survival. He was not fighting because he had been persuaded of any doctrine. He was fighting because someone had to stand between the Reapers and everyone else. That was all. That was the entire equation. There was no ambition, no pride, no calculation of victory. There was only the immovable insistence that no one else would face the storm alone as long as he was still breathing. That realization changed the way the Reapers treated him. They stopped treating him as an organism. They began treating him as a symbol. And symbols, they knew, were profoundly dangerous. Because as Hulk fought, the soldiers around him began fighting harder, not with more skill, not with better weapons, with more meaning. Alliance officers began coordinating their attacks in patterns that felt almost choreographed. Fleets that had once considered retreat now doubled down. Civilians who had been on the edge of despair now organized emergency supply lines through the smoke. Entire species that had never fully trusted each other began working with a level of unity the Council had failed to inspire for centuries. Hulk had not asked for any of this. Hulk had not spoken about strategy. Hulk had not demanded loyalty. His presence alone had shifted the emotional gravity of the war. The Reapers had spent uncounted millennia crushing resistance by robbing civilizations of hope. Now, in a single battle, on a single station, in the presence of a single being they had never predicted, they had unintentionally created the opposite of everything they had tried to build. They had created a legend, and legends were harder to erase than fleets, harder to indoctrinate than minds, harder to break than treaties. The Reapers concentrated everything against him. Their coordinated fire narrowed until an unbroken lattice of destruction formed around his position. Any organic creature caught in it would have dissolved instantly. Any Alliance vessel would have been shredded within seconds. Hulk stood at the center of it, absorbed the impact, and answered the only way he knew how. He leaped. Not away from the fire, but into it. His leap carried him upward, high above the battlefield, into the middle of a Reaper formation that had spent centuries harvesting civilizations. He landed on one of the largest war machines the galaxy had ever seen. Its armor was thicker than mountains. Its weapons could level moons. Its intelligence had ended empires. It did not matter. Hulk drove his fists into its central plating. The metal folded inward. Sparks the size of ships flew outward in every direction. He tore its main core open with his bare hands and threw the wreckage of that core down into the void of the sky. The resulting explosion illuminated the entire Citadel. For a moment the ruined station was bathed in golden light, as though a second sun had briefly ignited above it. Alliance soldiers looked up in silence. Civilians stared through shelter windows. Even Reaper ground troops paused. In that moment, everything paused. Then the Reapers moved again, because they had one final weapon. A weapon they had designed long ago for a threat they had believed hypothetical. A weapon meant to neutralize a being whose power could not be measured. A weapon that had never been used because such a being had never existed. Until now. The final weapon of the Reapers did not arrive with the shrieking urgency of an ordinary war machine. It rose from the deepest orbits of the surrounding fleet with a slowness that was almost ceremonial, as though its architects had understood, even long ago, that whatever creature warranted its awakening deserved the courtesy of witnessing its approach. It emerged from a Reaper transport large enough to dwarf entire dreadnoughts, unfolding piece by piece in the void, as though it had been waiting for a long time to remember its own shape. Alliance sensors struggled to register it. Half their systems failed to identify it at all. What remained was a silhouette so large that even veteran soldiers who had spent decades staring into the abyss felt a chill they could not name. The construct was not simply another machine. It was a mobile fragment of the Reaper collective intelligence itself, housed within an armored frame the size of a small moon. It carried thousands of interlocking weapons, layered defensive systems, and a mind that had absorbed more knowledge than every organic species combined. Its purpose was not to defeat enemies. Its purpose was to erase them from the record, to sever their existence so thoroughly that even memory would refuse to hold them. It had never before been used. It had never before been needed. It had been designed for a being like Hulk. As it began to move into position over the Citadel, the environment around the station transformed. The construct extended feeders of dark energy into the surrounding space, drawing power from every nearby source. Alliance ships lost thrust. Reactors sputtered. Kinetic barriers thinned. The Citadel's structural integrity began to warp under the immense gravitational pull of the weapon overhead. Districts collapsed on their own weight. Skyways cracked apart. Structures that had stood for thousands of years buckled without warning. The Citadel was not being destroyed by the weapon. It was simply being consumed by its presence. Shepard did not hesitate. They ordered every remaining vessel to evacuate. They ordered every civilian to withdraw to the deepest sanctuaries. They ordered every soldier to fall back to lines that could be defended long enough to give the survivors a chance. And then, when officers demanded to know what Shepard themselves would do, Shepard simply looked at the screen showing Hulk's position and did not answer. Hulk remained. He would not retreat. He would not withdraw. The final weapon of the Reapers had come to erase him, and he had come to meet it. There was no negotiation left. There was no strategy. There was only the ancient truth that every battle eventually reduces itself to two forces standing across from each other, and only one of them walks away. The construct fired its first attack. It was not a beam. It was not a projectile. It was something older, something more raw. A pulse of directed information. It reached Hulk's mind before it reached his body, unfolding an ocean of imagery inside him at speeds no organic brain could resist. Hulk staggered. His footing shifted. The weapon had begun to bypass every layer of his defense in a manner nothing else ever had. Then the Reaper intelligence spoke. It spoke without malice. That was the most disturbing part. There was no anger, no hatred, only a calm certainty deep and vast, older than most civilizations. It told Hulk that rage was meaningless. It told him that every act of resistance he had ever committed was a shadow cast against an infinite sky. It told him that civilizations always destroy themselves, that resistance only creates more suffering, that protecting anyone was, in the long term, cruelty disguised as compassion. It showed him cycles, hundreds of them, thousands, civilizations rising and falling in patterns so consistent they resembled tides. Species building empires that ended in silence. Cultures reaching for stars only to burn out among them. Every generation believing itself unique, every generation ending the same. It showed him the fields of dead worlds the Reapers had harvested. It showed him the graveyards of concepts that had once seemed inviolable. It showed him the futility of protection, the fragility of hope, the pointlessness of standing against a universe that continually consumed its own creations. For a moment Hulk saw the logic. He truly saw it. He saw the beauty of the pattern, the elegance of the cycle, the horrible symmetry of civilizations that could not seem to help destroying themselves given enough time. He saw why the Reapers believed they were mercy, not cruelty. He saw why they thought their invasions were kindness rather than genocide. He saw from a great height a version of the universe in which fighting them at all was madness. But then he saw something else. He saw the faces of the people currently fighting beside him. A young Alliance officer with a shaking hand who kept firing anyway. A Turian medic who had refused to abandon their patients even as buildings collapsed around them. A civilian mother who had held her child through the entire invasion, whispering songs neither he nor she truly believed would help, but who whispered them anyway. An old Krogan warrior who laughed at every explosion and called them beautiful. A Solarian scientist who had died at their station rather than leave. Shepherd, unbending, tired, human, extraordinary. He saw people who refused to surrender. People who did not care that the universe had a pattern. People who believed that their future was worth protecting even if the odds insisted otherwise. People who had chosen to live not because life was guaranteed, but because it was theirs. Hulk rose. The Reaper weapon attacked again, this time with a physical strike that shattered the ground beneath him. Hulk absorbed the impact. He stepped forward. The construct fired another pulse of information into his mind. Hulk kept walking. The construct extended its most advanced weapons, ones that had never been fired. Hulk broke into a full charge. His footsteps left craters. His body left after images. His fists gathered a green light so intense that Alliance ships nearly a kilometer away felt the shift in air pressure. He leaped one final time, higher than he had ever leaped, driving himself toward the center of the massive construct. Worldbreaker Hulk unleashed his greatest strike. The shockwave tore through the Reaper formation like the exhale of an ancient god. Ships that had never known damage were split in half. Weapons designed to end planets shattered along their frames. The construct itself buckled beneath the impact, its armor peeling apart in long, curling wounds. Its central intelligence attempted to reroute functions, attempted to close cracks, attempted to seal itself against the invasion of a being it had classified as impossible. It failed. Hulk drove his fists into the core. The Reaper intelligence experienced something for the first time in an existence that stretched beyond memory. Fear. Not simulated fear, not modeled fear. Not fear as a variable. True fear. The kind of fear that comes when a mind realizes it is about to be unmade. The kind of fear that no calculation had ever fully described. The construct collapsed inward, its armored plates fractured. Its long-buried memory spilled into the void, cycles upon cycles of harvested knowledge disintegrating into meaningless static. The Reaper Collective felt the loss the way a great tree feels the loss of a branch, and around the Citadel, coordinated Reaper forces began to lose synchronization. Individual units hesitated. Fleets misfired. Command signals stuttered. The Alliance moved. Fleets pushed forward. Ground forces reclaimed districts. Turian squadrons broke enemy lines that had held for weeks. Asari commandos rewrote defensive fronts within minutes. Krogan warships charged into gaps that had opened across the Reaper sphere. Solarian units dismantled orbital platforms with weapons that had only just been finished. The Reaper cycle, once considered inevitable, began to fold beneath the weight of its own uncertainty. The Citadel survived, barely. Its towers were broken. Its skylines were unrecognizable. Its people were exhausted beyond description. But it survived. As the smoke cleared, Worldbreaker Hulk stood among the ruins. His shoulders were heavy. His breathing was slow. His eyes still glowed with a rage that had not fully cooled. He was exhausted, perhaps more exhausted than he had ever been. But he was still standing. And standing in a war like this was everything. The days that followed the Citadel's survival did not feel like victory. They felt like breathing after a long time underwater. The Reaper invasion did not end all at once. It unraveled. Without their central intelligence directing the great cycles of destruction, Reaper forces across the galaxy began to lose coordination. Fleets misfired. Ground forces broke formation. Ancient patterns of extinction, refined across countless civilizations, began to falter like machines whose blueprints had been erased mid-operation. Alliance fleets pursued the remnants across systems that had spent months trembling beneath the shadow of annihilation. The Citadel began the slow work of rebuilding, not all at once, not with celebration, with the quiet, steady rhythm of a species that had almost forgotten what tomorrow felt like. Engineers repaired what could be repaired. Civilians returned to districts they were not sure would ever feel like home again. Memorials rose in the ruined avenues, small at first, then larger, until entire promenades became gardens of names. Across the galaxy, stories spread about the strange green giant who had appeared during the darkest hour of civilization. In some systems, he was called a monster. In others, a weapon. In many, a hero. Songs began to appear on frontier worlds. Paintings surfaced in colonies that had never seen him with their own eyes. Children began drawing him in the margins of their schoolwork. Every species remembered him in their own language, shaped by their own fears and their own hopes. Shepard knew the truth was more complicated than any of the stories. Hulk had never wanted medals. He had never wanted political rank. He had never asked for statues, ceremonies, or speeches. He had simply seen people being hurt and decided that someone had to stand between them and the darkness. That was the beginning and the end of his motive. Every attempt to explain him beyond that felt smaller than the truth. Eventually, Bruce Banner disappeared. The Citadel scientists searched for him. They studied logs, scanned records, examined every corner of the station and every departing vessel. They found nothing, no trace, no signal, no coordinates. He had simply stopped being where they could reach him. Some believed Hulk had finally died. Some believed he had left the galaxy entirely. Some believed he had chosen a quieter life on a world no one would ever find. Then, months later, far beyond the Citadel, a distant colony reported a mysterious seismic event. A gigantic crater had appeared just outside the settlement. There had been no warning, no impact from orbit, no storm. Simply a hole in the ground shaped by something that had arrived without asking permission. Survivors reported seeing a massive green figure walking through the smoke. Some said he did not speak. Some said he looked tired. Some said he simply walked past their homes as though he were passing through and not staying. The final narration returned to the central paradox of everything that had happened. The galaxy had spent centuries fearing monsters. It had feared the Reapers most of all. It had built stories, defenses, treaties, and mythologies around the belief that the greatest danger to civilization was something too vast to fight. The Reapers had believed that too. They had believed that every civilization could be reduced to data. Every hero could be reduced to a variable. Every future could be reduced to a projection. They had constructed their entire cycle upon that belief. It had never failed them. But in the ruins of the Citadel they had made one mistake. They had encountered something they could not calculate, something that grew stronger when pushed to the brink, something that refused to yield to logic, to fear, to promises, or to despair, something that had chosen, again and again, to stand between the darkness and the people who did not deserve it. The Reapers had spent an eternity convincing civilizations that resistance was pointless. Then Worldbreaker Hulk arrived, and he showed the galaxy what happens when the thing you fear most is the one thing that refuses to break. The Reapers had conquered civilizations by convincing them that resistance was pointless. Then Worldbreaker Hulk arrived and showed the galaxy what happens when the thing you fear most is the one thing that refuses to break.